Erica, do you have any like preliminary intro, or should I just go right
No,
into it?
take it away. And,
Okay,
and if obviously our hope is that everybody gets really informed about this and, you know, we all make a connection and, whatever happens here, there's continuity
great.
afterwards.
So thank you everybody for joining, and thank you to Laura and your team for making the time to make this presentation. Just by way of introduction, Laura and I met several years ago. We were on a Bisno panel together. She was a senior deal exec at LNL Holding at the time, a very large New York City developer. We've kept in touch. I recently learned that Paula started this platform with her colleagues that are on this call to originate and advise with respect to CPACE financing. I don't know if any of you have seen, but there have been several articles and several groups that are starting to become active in this kind of financing. It's a unique kind of financing. It's low cost, low risk, and provides additional capital in the capital stack on real estate developments and transactions. We have another client that is getting into the space as well. And so Laura and I were chatting that it might make sense to do this kind of 1 hour presentation to those people that are interested. She and her colleagues have done it for other law firms. Firms are starting to get involved in the space, and so we thought it would be a good idea to inform everybody about the product, what's going on, and how A, we can get involved, and B, how we might be able to share business opportunities between our group and our firm. So with that introduction, Laura, you have on the phone about 30 of us that are across between our real estate group, our corporate group, our environmental group, and our real estate special opportunities group, which has become active given some of the non-performing and distressed deals that we're seeing in the marketplace. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. So thank you, Jordan, and everyone here for and Erica for setting this up and for taking an interest in learning about CPACE. Just a really, as Jordan mentioned, we've known each other for many years. I recently left LNL to start my own firm with my partner Evan. We started a firm called Northbridge Opportunities to take advantage of opportunities at the intersection of real estate and renewables. We saw that there was a real opportunity where people in real estate didn't understand perhaps the renewables world and how it could work with them, and same thing in renewables, really understanding the nuances of real estate. So Evan's background is also on the development side, as is mine at LNL. I ran capital raising in our 425 Park development. I also did development at Tishman Speyer, and Evan's built about 1,000 condo units. I started my life as a lender at Lehman. He's also been a lender. So we come to this from the borrower and lender side. So, and developer, we started, so we have two verticals. One is the acquisition and development of solar, and the second one is CPACE financing. And we're very excited by the opportunities in the CPACE market. And we find that in particular right now is an ideal time to use the product. But the limiting factor is people don't really know about it. They don't know to use it. They don't know how to use it. They have a lot of misconceptions about how it is. And so we've been spending a lot of time, as Jordan mentioned, educating lawyers and lenders and borrowers and brokers, just what CPACE is and what it isn't. So, our idea was to use this time to kind of give an overview, but we really want it to be an interactive session. So feel free to, ask a question or, type in a question. We'll see it. We want to make sure we kind of answer, any questions you guys have. What I would say is that 99% of people in the market have never heard of this before. So if it's something that you've come into contact with before, you're very much ahead of the curve. But if you haven't, it's because it hasn't really gotten the size and scale that it should. So I guess first, what is CPACE? So CPACE is a program that enables commercial property owners to borrow money from a private lender and repay those funds by a voluntary tax assessment, similar to a sewer assessment, on the property over a very long period of time, to the tune of 20 or 30 years. It has to comply with state and local laws. There is absolutely zero standardization throughout the entire country. It's currently available in 26 states, but each municipality has to opt into it. And the local program requirements, which we'll get into later, are different for every single state. So it makes life interesting and complicated at the same time. And it's totally non-recourse. It cannot be accelerated, and we can structure it with a up to a 5-year interest-only period called a capitalized interest period, which again, I think works really well. So it provides security for both the owner as well as the senior mortgage lender. And I think the most important thing to realize that CPACE financing is passive. We are not in the loan-to-own business, and it's competitive now with rates. So most people don't know about it because it's been really small scale. It's been around since 2007, and the cumulative market shares as of the end of 2019 was $1.5 billion. Cumulative. It's had 150% year-over-year growth for the last 3 years, and this year, given everything with COVID, it's on track to exceed that. What we're seeing is that we're really in CPACE 2.0. Previously, it was done for, call it $50,000, $500,000, $1.5 million retroactive, improvements on putting solar on a building in Connecticut. That's actually how it started. Small energy retrofits for a secondary, tertiary market. Where we're seeing it now and why this is interesting is we can provide non-recourse funding, up to 5 years IO, with a 25 to 30 year payback period. We can do as part of new construction. It can be part of a rescue capital or runway capital, as I hear is the new term that we all want to use, runway capital, refinance. And then there's also the ability to retroactively use the funds in certain states for costs that were previously incurred to now. And so, well, how do you get this money? So you have to be CPACE eligible. What does that mean? CPACE eligibility is anything, CPACE stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. What it means to be CPACE eligible, though, is a little different than you would think. And in terms of the real estate perspective, windows, doors, roofs, curtain wall, HVAC, plumbing, electric, seismic measures in California, storm resiliency, waters, turning tubs to shower conversions in a hotel, and low flow toilets. There's a lot of things in projects that people already have or have done that become CPACE eligible. You don't have to be a LEED Platinum building to be CPACE eligible. And I think that's a nuance, because even in the developer me, when I first started hearing about this, I'm like, gosh, what can count? And I think the biggest thing to think about is new construction is probably the easiest way to get this, because new construction counts. And so there's 3 different tests that you have. There's an LTV test, that's a state-by-state basis, but generally around 20 to 25% LTV. And then the next question is, what's the valuation? It's actually on an as stabilized value or loan to cost if you're going to be doing new construction. There's a DSCR test, which is somewhere between 1.25 down to 1.1 for prime markets with strong borrowers. And then lastly, there's a CPACE eligibility test. And in order to figure out the total dollars into a project, and we'll give you some examples of projects that we're actively working on right now, it's the lesser of those 3 tests. And so there's really a lot of applications. And I think that the last thing to think about is, okay, well, so Laura, that's great, you can give me the money. Do you have to write the check to my MEP, subcontractor? And the answer is no, it goes directly to the borrower. The funds go to the borrower. And so in the case of new construction, we'll fund basically in line with the senior lender. We have to fund on a pro rata basis for costs that have been incurred. So similar to the way you do a monthly pencil rec with a senior lender, we would be tying the costs. If the costs have already been incurred, then we can give the money to the borrower, and the borrower can do anything from use it to pay down a senior loan, which we're seeing a lot of right now for blend and extend situations. We're seeing it for rescue capital, for cost overruns, carry costs. Less likely is the ability to take the money out of the property, but you really could if you wanted to. I don't know that we'd be so keen on that, but a lot of flexibility in how you can use the money. And I think that lastly, when you think about the problems that we're having in the market now, the lack of liquidity, a lot of the asset classes, especially hospitality, is really needing liquidity. To be able to use this money to cover carry costs, and then have a 5-year period for which there is nothing that you owe us. During a capitalized interest period, we fully capitalize our interest at close, and then we amortize, we accrue it, and then the payback starts at the end of the 5 years. So if it's a 25-year payback, it's actually a 30-year piece of paper, 5 years of IO with a 25-year payback. It's a fully, you accrue the interest and you fully amortize the total financed amount over the 25-year payback period. It's a fixed payment and it's fully prepayable. So in a market like right now, you can have the flexibility to get the money, to get the interest for it, and to really worry about paying back in 5 years' time and the whole stay alive till 25 in the hotel industry. Like, this works perfectly for that, for projects that have had some cost overruns, same thing. So lots of different applications for it, and it's also again, the ability to be fully prepaid and close quickly is great. And so for us, we have a partnership with Greenworks and with Carval, and we will ultimately securitize the cash flows as muni bonds. That's really how CPACE works. And so with that, again, passive capital, and there's really we will write in as large a check as needed. I mean, again, historically the market's been, $1 million, $2 million, $50,000. We're doing deals in the 9-figure range, a lot in the 8 figures. We're seeing a lot of different great applications. So, okay, this is great. You're coming senior, you prime. The next thing we hear is like, okay, you prime the senior, and the answer is no. So and I think it's important to understand how CPACE works during the whole duration. Well, what CPACE can do to the capital stack, and how that all counts. So during the capitalized interest period, there is absolutely nothing that comes before the senior loan. We show up, let's use the outside example, 5 years of capitalized interest. There is nothing that comes between the property and the first mortgage at that time, because 100% of our costs are paid back at close. And I should mention that this is, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's paid out through taxes. So your taxes once you put a CPACE assessment on, the CPACE, your taxes, as paid by the local municipality, and that's how the borrower repays us, is through the local municipality, the taxes increase. And so the taxes increase, but we actually have prepaid the interest during that cap-I period. Once that cap-I period is over and it's the payback period, again, we'll use 25 years, and let's just use round numbers, $25 million, $1 million a year payback. Only whatever the taxes are due that year is the amount that can come before the senior mortgage. And there is no acceleration. So it would be $1 million is the only amount that can come before the senior mortgage. If there's a problem with the property, we allow the senior mortgage to come in foreclose. Again, we don't want this property. We allow the senior mortgage to come in foreclose. If the taxes are in default, once they've foreclosed on the property, then not only they haven't paid their local property taxes, they also haven't paid their CPACE payment, that $1 million. So their local taxes plus the $1 million, not the $25 million, that's accruing at whatever the local municipality default rate is. That's the amount that needs to be cured before they, because of the tax lien, before the new borrower can move on, the new owner can move on with the property. It's fully transferable. So at that point, if they wanted to just pay the $1 million plus whatever accrued interest is, they've solved it, and then they kind of keep going on and they pay the $1 million a year for the remaining, let's just say that was in year 2 of the payback period, remaining 23 years. If they decide, you know what, I really don't want CPACE, then they just pay whatever the outstanding balance is at that time, and the prepayment penalty. And we structure each deal differently. The interest rate is somewhere in the 5.5 to 7 range right now. Some groups are going out until 8. And the prepayment penalties are tried to be structured so that it's in line with the business plan of the borrower. Any questions? Okay. So it's available in 26 states. One of the reasons why a lot of people on the institutional side may not have heard about it is because New York State hadn't allowed it until 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago now. New York State just approved new construction for CPACE 2.5 weeks ago, and now that's law signed by Cuomo, and New York City should be in operation by the end of the year. We're actually active in due diligence on a number of New York City projects right now, with the idea that we will go through diligence in a parallel process with the opening of the program. Once the program is open, then we can fund. And that allows probably a 2-year retroactive look back. We're waiting for the exact language. We've been able to approximate, how that works. For other states that have already opened, such as California and Florida, those are fantastic states for CPACE. You can go up to 35% LTV on an a cash flowing opened asset, and there's a 3-year retroactive look back. So that means that you could have put improvements in a project 3 years ago or 2 years ago. We can give you an example of the deal we're looking at now. It's a hotel that was opened. They put on, they have some projects that occurred within the last 2 years, different projects. One is an elevator retrofit. Another one is they upgraded all their HVAC systems. Another one is an electric. There's a number of just distinct projects, and they're in need of liquidity. What they've done is they've identified these projects. We're able to fund those now, give them up to 5 years of cap-I to allow them to take the funds, not worry about paying us back, gives the lender comfort. And then at that point, then they can start their 25-year payback period. So it's a way for them to pull out liquidity. Another example in Florida is there's a project that was just finished. The project in Florida is a multifamily ground up project. Fantastic. There's an existing senior and an existing mezz that are very expensive. They're looking to take out the senior and the mezz with cheaper capital, and when they're looking to put on CPACE alongside a senior loan. And we've structured a 3 or 4 year cap-I period for them, because it's really a 2+1 bridge till stabilization, because they're just not stabilized. I mean, they opened up, it's a great product. They're almost complete, but they're not fully stabilized yet. And so with projects like that, projects that are already complete, our hotel in Utah, for example, that opened in 2019, it's a beautiful hotel. The borrower's going to be using our funds to pay down the senior for most of it, blend and extend, and then also use the balance of a CPACE cost to pay carry costs for the project. They just need some time. And so I think that CPACE works really well with that, because we don't need to be paid back now, nor do we want the property. And so we're very much aligned with both the senior and the borrower to get to that next post-COVID period when the property is truly stabilized. But there are 14 different states. We can send around some materials. Every state has different look-back requirements, but it allows a project that was already complete, whether you did the work or you've acquired a building that somebody else did the work. That's the other thing that's interesting. You could buy a building. This isn't acquisition financing unless the building is new or has had some recent renovations. You can then apply CPACE as part of the new capital stack because of work that had been done to the project, and energy audits are used and required. So this all sounds great. How do I do this? A deal can close basically 60 days from a term sheet being signed. There's an initial review process. What we require is a detailed construction budget, 5-year pro forma in Excel, and a capital stack. We require 10% equity in a project. It has to be true equity. It can't be, historical tax credits. This is not to get people to over 100 or up to 100% leverage. We want some skin in the game. Once we have that, we can issue a term sheet. Assuming all goes well, they pay a deposit, then we can close within 60 days. We will fund 100% of our costs plus accrued interest into an account at close. So the senior lender shouldn't be concerned about the availability of the funds. As part of the diligence, it's typical diligence that you would expect: appraisal, budget. I think the only nuance is there's a technical review, and that's what's required of the technical review is the MEP, contractor, the architect, or we can hire another group. We'll work with Greenworks, who's our partner, who will put on the assessment, and we'll work on the technical review aspects of that to make sure that to identify the eligible measures, just to make sure that we have the eligible measures tied. And then Greenworks will submit an application to the administrator, and then there's closing. It's pretty simple. To date, over 280 lenders have approved CPACE, and that number is growing. That's as of September, and that doesn't count all the deals that are in diligence. There's a number of deals in New York that are in the pipeline. There's a number of deals we have where those, we've been having active conversations. I've had one this afternoon with another lender. I had one yesterday. We're spending a lot of time with lenders who hadn't heard about it. They said before, no. I'm going to get prime the whole time. And then we explain how this actually can work and can be structured in a way that's favorable to them. And then the conversation changes. Or I had previously had these notions about it, and I'm hearing from my friends and my lawyers, like maybe I should be thinking about it again. I'm interested. And it ranges from, you know, EB5 groups approving this, JP Morgan, Acor, Wells. I mean, those are the groups that have already approved it, to a lot of other debt funds, non-recourse lenders that are trying to figure out how they can make it work, or just they didn't really, they had misconceived notions about how it really worked and how it can work for them. And it's also been approved in some CMBS documents as well. So there's an intercreditor agreement, there's a consent, there can be an escrow agreement. There's just lots of different ways to structure this. No deal is the same, and it's just really early innings of this. I'd say it's like really like the first inning. Second, it's been around for 12 years, but 13 years, but it's very much an evolving market that people are now starting to say, huh, how can I use this? Like, it's not mezz, it doesn't accelerate. It's not a ground lease, it doesn't increase senior to the first mortgage, but there's ways to mitigate around. There's visibility into the pipeline, into the costs. The same way a lender is going to escrow OPEX and taxes, they're also going to include the CPACE payment for that. So it's not like, oops, I missed 1 or 2 months of, you know, CPACE payments. Now I'm in default. Now the CPACE lender is going to take the property away. It's not that way at all. In fact, you're only paying your taxes once or twice a year. It is a fixed payment for the duration of the loan. It's not even a loan, the assessment, for whenever it's actually getting paid. And that's after that capitalized interest period. So there will be a long runway before this payment is due. And if there's a problem, the senior lender could just pay that $1 million payment. Or at that point, if they're really not able to pay their OPEX, their taxes, because you can't just pay the property taxes and not pay the CPACE payment. If there's really that scenario, then they're probably going to foreclose, and it's going to take us 2+ years to even foreclose after that. So there's a lot of comfort that the senior lenders are getting when they truly understand how it works. It works with mezz and pref too. And in the case of default, we step aside, we don't accelerate. I think that, again, I want to just keep harping on the fact that in the problem of foreclosure, because that's what everyone's mind goes to, is okay, in the event of default and foreclosure, like, and this all sounds great, but what happens if we hit a really rough patch or things aren't so great? We step aside, we don't, it's the $1 million, that's the only amount that can come ahead of the senior, not the $25 million, or if at that point there's $23 million left, like that's, you know, that's the only amount that can come out. And we're seeing it all across the country. We can do every asset class but condos. And we can do, there's a deal right now we're working on that is mixed use, so we're able to apply the CPACE assessment to the office portion of an office condo property. And we're creating really creative structures. So it's everything from redevelopment capital, rescue, new construction, refinance. It works really well. And then the other thing we're also finding is that in terms of the other line of our business, you can add solar to a lot of these projects. Solar can be paid for by CPACE financing. It will help increase the NOI. You can be passed through to tenants, so it becomes a marketing tool. It helps with the whole ESG angle. We can look at that in the parallel process, whether either us or somebody else, as just a way to improve some of these assets. And there's a whole tax credit that goes to the people too. So with that, happy to talk about, that's kind of quick high-level overview. Happy to speak about more specific nuances, more of the deals. You tell me what you guys want to hear.
Laura, I had a quick question. This is Rab. You mentioned rescue and you mentioned sort of refi. How does it work if there's a current senior lender and you guys are in place as well, and there's a series of defaults, taxes haven't been paid, things of that nature, you know, which is, you know, happening certainly in the market. Are there issues with the refi lender coming in, being primed, or priority issues? Is that state to state, or is that, you know, is it more nuanced?
So great question. So to the extent that we're coming into a property, I think the way to think about it, so I'm glad you asked this question, is when we're coming into a property, we're able to structure a period of 2 to 5 years of capitalized interest. So there is a period for which when we're coming in, and this is why it works really well with rescue capital, that we don't prime anybody, especially during this really difficult time where everyone's trying to stabilize the property. It's only after the period when the cap I is over that any amount of our capital could prime that existing lender. And it's fully assumable. So let's say they can get out, we're totally fine being in the stack with the next guy.
Understood. And that's nationwide. It's not, there's nothing state to state on that.
No, that's just the way the structure
Okay.
works. The amount of the amount of the capitalized interest is not the same for all different groups. Our bucket of capital is able to go out 5 years. Most of the market can go out 2 or 3. So what we've been finding is we're able to help solve a lot of the more complicated, larger deals, partially because of the capital we have and partially because of our experience on the real estate side, having done some complicated transactions and trying to think about it differently. But it's each state will limit the LTV. So just working backwards, so you guys understand how we think about it. There is an LTV test. In Texas, actually, it was just increased from 20 to 25%, which was great for one of our borrowers. We're doing some projects in Texas. But let's say it's 25% LTV. That's inclusive of the fees. So included in that 25% is the capitalized interest. So depending on what's important to the borrower and to the capital stack, and we look at this holistically, we want to make it work for everybody if we're coming in. Having, do you want fewer proceeds? The levers are proceeds, rate, and capitalized interest period. We can construct every deal is totally different. There's not a single standardization throughout our pipeline and our portfolio right now, but we can structure something where maybe there's 4 years of cap I, but slightly fewer proceeds, but that works because of the way, they need to get stabilized, or they say, you know what, I think I'm going to be stabilized in 2 years, so I'll take 3 years of cap I, give me some cushion, I want a few extra dollars now. We're up against these leverage caps in each market, and that's what's not standard. Also, what counts and doesn't count. Seismic measures count in California, but not in Florida. Storm resiliency measures count in, across the board. And what you'd think that counts as storm resiliency is different. So in Florida, we have a hotel that we're working on. They are doing a whole retrofit of their hotel. They were planning on it before. They found out about CPACE. So they're actually doing their business plan and looking to accelerate some of their future projects that they were always going to do out of equity. I said, listen, save your cash. Accelerate your projects while you have low occupancy. You have the money now, get this done, upgrade your property during the downturn. We're going to structure a long capitalized interest period. I think in this case, we're doing 4 years. And at that point, you're stabilized. You can conserve your cash flow. You have a better product. You have a stronger NOI. You can pay us off if you want at that point, or you can keep us on at the property. They actually think they may want to keep us on because in the hotel world, you could charge an energy fee. You're not going to do that in 2020. But when the world gets back to normal, you could charge an energy fee the same way you charge a resort fee to your tenant, to your guest, excuse me. And on the commercial side, whether industrial, an office building, retail, you could pass through this cost to your tenant because it's taxes. It's an increase in taxes. So, your base year might be able to, if you're doing, over a base year for a pass through, you could do that. If you're doing triple net, it can get passed through. There are ways to, offset these future costs if you want to keep the financing in place.
Laura, I have a question. So if I'm doing a new acquisition or a refinancing and I'm starting my discussions with my senior lender, who's one of the 280 or so that have approved the program, it sounds like that's going to be relatively straightforward. But what if I closed on the acquisition and I have financing in place from a year ago? How and to what extent is my lender going to be amenable to now considering this, underwriting this, and documenting it a year into my loan term?
So I think every deal is a great question. I think every deal is different. To the extent that it's for an acquisition, CPACE has to be tied to eligible measures. So if it's just a straight acquisition, it's a core deal, and you're just leasing, it's not really the best use of CPACE. If you're about to go through a massive renovation or you went through a renovation, generally people are finding that CPACE works better because the alternative is very expensive mezz and they've got a gun to the borrower's head and their borrower's forced to do things that might not be in the long-term best interest of the property for value. Secondly, as it relates to the senior, they're going to see that their NOI is probably, if they're going to be doing new things and we're paying for those new measures, their NOI will probably be impacted in a positive way because of the cost reduction for some of these energy saving things. So that actually, these are dollars that they don't have to fund that can be structured so it doesn't prime them. Again, it all depends on their term. If they're a 7-year lender, we can't go 7 years IO, but presumably the work would be done within 2 years. And let's say we structure a 3 or 4 year IO, they're going to benefit from the extra measures to reduce their operating expenses and potentially also increase their revenue from getting tenants because of whatever measures they put into the building, whether they pass through to the tenant or pass through to the borrower, the owner. So it really depends, and it doesn't have to. I mean, again, most of the conversations we're having these days are not with for our borrowers, lenders, are not with the groups on this list. People are really trying to figure out how this works, and I think in some ways this feels like very early days. CMBS in Europe in the 2000s was actually where I worked on securitizations 2 through 10 at Lehman. Like, we were explaining to people what CMBS is, how you can sell an asset. In the 90s, early 90s, when there was a liquidity crisis in the States and CMBS really came out, it was a new product. People had to figure out how to use it. Is it the right answer for every asset? No, but is there a lot of uses for it? Yes. In the 2009, 2010 EB5, I mean, it wasn't something people had used before, but because of a lack of liquidity, it became an interesting alternative solution. Now what we're seeing is we're being brought into deals and we're being considered in lieu of EB5 or in lieu of MEZ or both, depending on how large we can go. And it's about getting lender comfort. And just to be candid, like, a lot of it is us having multiple conversations with lenders to get them comfortable. And I think an opportunity for you guys to, build up more practice in the space to understand it, to give your clients comfort, because it's just a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of ways to structure so that it could work. So in this case, it would be working with a lender. And I think at that point, if they're looking for money, they're gonna be looking for money because the project's going sideways, they're trying to take on new CapEx dollars, maybe the lender's last dollar is a lot higher in the stack than they initially wanted to because the valuations have come down, and they don't want to spend more money, and they don't necessarily want expensive mezz. They don't want 15 or 12% mezz. And so it's a conversation and structuring.
So my follow-up question would be, I closed on my property and my predecessor owner made eligible improvements prior to my acquisition over the last 2 or 3 years. What kind of documentation is the CPACE lender going to require in connection with those improvements that predated me, as I may not have asked for and obtained, documentation necessarily in connection with roof, windows, HVAC, et cetera, in connection with my acquisition?
Sure. So that's a little bit more complicated, but totally not out of the question, which is why I raised earlier. Basically, there's going to be a technical review that we need. We will have to be creative and go and find out who were the contractors on the site, who were the consultants that were used. Is there a way to prove when these things came in? Ultimately, you have to prove when the permits were closed out. So again, you can go to, whichever local department to, get the permits, find out. Again, there's a lot of sleuth work. Find out who had the permits, go back and figure out who they are. I'm sure if it's interesting enough to do this, there will be a reputable contractor. So you can go and find out, who worked on this project, pull up the energy audits. We can run an energy audit. In New York, NYSERDA will actually pay for it. Each state's different. So it's something that takes a while, probably 2 to 3 weeks, but we're actually finding this now for a client who's actively bidding, who's actually in the market now, and they're going to do a NYSERDA audit. NYSERDA is going to pay while they do the energy audit to show what is CPACE eligible now as opposed to during the due diligence, so we can give a more specific answer to what is CPACE appropriate, CPACE eligible. So that's not as straightforward, but there's a path to that, and we basically would work with you and your client to kind of try to figure that out, just knowing the different people we know in the construction world, and just different ways to get that information. But ultimately, it comes down to an audit and as part of this technical review. There's an in-house technical team at Greenworks which will also help look through the different costs to make sure those are CPACE eligible. What we've been spending a lot of time with is different asset managers who are trying, scratching their head saying, I need money. Like, how can I look at what I already have and pull money out? And we've been finding interesting ways to make that happen.
So if we're working with a client that's diligencing an acquisition now, and the client decides that it wants to consider CPACE, it would be wise to include in our diligence getting documentation that our prospective CPACE lender is going to ask for as
Yes.
part of that diligence process. Okay.
Totally. And I'd say, and feel free to bring us in early. We're doing everything from, looking at, we can have a pretty quick turnaround to things, just given our familiarity with budgets and structures, et cetera. Just to kind of give you a quick read of where that would be. But
What's going on? Sorry.
Hello? Robert, you might want to put yourself
Congratulations.
Robert, you might want to be on mute. I don't know
That's
you.
awesome.
Rob,
Very exciting.
I'll text him.
That's
All right.
really
Anyway,
great.
it's exciting. So congratulations to your friend Rob. So with that, we're actually putting out term sheets, indicative terms for new construction, where they will get the CPACE terms from us, and then they will go shop it to the rest of their capital stack as they're going to the market. And we're happy to have the conversations with the lenders, because groups are finding, wow, this is incredibly accretive. I'd like to make this work. And so we're saying, listen, we'll sit with you. We're happy to have those conversations, because most groups don't know about this or think it's structured another way, and we can come up with something that's interesting and works. So we can also be at the very front end of the process and, be part of that marketing, marketing the capital stack that's being marketed.
You mentioned foreclosure, that you have no problem with the senior lender foreclosing. I assume that's pretty standard under the intercreditor. That sort of would govern how that plays out. It's just a pretty straightforward process, right?
Yes, and I think that's really important. We want the senior lender to be able to foreclose. We don't. I mean, that's should be giving the lender comfort. It is in their favor, and we are very much, while we are at the top of the capital stack, we're also the bottom, because we let them foreclose first. It will probably take 2.5 years. If you're not paying your taxes, 2.5 years for us to actually foreclose with taxes. And that is not our preferred method either. I mean, I can say that, but it's also in writing,
So you're saying under the intercreditor, they really have a lot of latitude to do what they need to do, and you guys would sort of stand pat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's an intercreditor, there's lender consent, there can be an escrow agreement. One of the things we've also floated for some groups, you could escrow 2 years of CPACE if you really wanted to, such that you're always having an extra year of CPACE payments in escrow. The same way you'd escrow monthly your, OPEX and taxes, you could ask if the property, can support it like 2 years in advance, so that you're always refilling 1 extra year. And so in that case, there's nothing that would cause us to be in default. As long as we get paid, that's great. All the other rights are, yours. Any other questions?
So Paula, before we close, you had sent me early on when we first started talking a slide deck that has a lot of the information that you discussed today.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can send us, if that's been updated, whatever your current slide deck is, so we can distribute it to the people on the call and other people in the firm.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Absolutely. Delighted to, if you have questions now or questions that come up, whether with you or your client, we're happy to have a conversation with you to get more into the nuances of what can be done or can't be done for certain projects. Certain states, again, are easier. New Jersey will be in play by the end of Q1 of 2021. The Northeast states are harder to give proceeds to than to California and Florida and Utah. We're working on some other creative ways to get around that. But it's a new source of capital. It's very, very borrower and lender friendly when you understand what it can and can't do. And I think can be a really nice addition to these capital stacks. And we're seeing people saying, wow, this is like, why didn't I ever hear about this before? So yeah, delighted to talk to you, and thank you for making the time.
Anybody else? Once, twice? Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.